welcome everybody. So we have a couple of different ways we can work this. Right now we have about 37 people on. I expect we'll have a few more, and we might have some people pop in and out of this. And I hope this day has been helpful, and thank you everybody for sticking with us. I know it's been a long day and people are experiencing Zoom fatigue. I certainly can understand that. I think I've been on more Zoom calls in the past month than I have pretty much ever. So it's definitely a new and unique experience for everyone. So what I'd like to do is have this somewhat roughly structured, but what I'd like to do is have people contribute some information, and if they would like to unmute themselves, what I would actually ask, if you would like to unmute yourself, is you do have a couple of options. As a participant, if you click on the participant in the chat bar, you can raise your hand, just so we don't have people talking over each other. Or if you'd like to put something in the chat bar and just let me know you're going to unmute yourselves, again, so we can have people all have a nice conversation with each other instead of all trying to talk at once, which is also can be fun, but is a little less productive. What I'd like to focus on, we talked a lot about cleaning. We talked about further thinking things, what to do with your inn if you have to close or you're planning on closing, unfortunately. But the things that we really haven't touched on that I have heard so far, and I couldn't sit in all the breakout sessions, but I popped into as many of them as I could, is one, what are you doing personally to protect yourselves? And this may not be current if your inn is closed, but do you have plans in place? And if you don't, what are you thinking about doing to protect yourself, and if you have staff, in the future when you reopen? So I'd like to discuss that for a few minutes. And then also dining specifically. So what plans do you have in place, or what are you thinking about doing to protect your guests and also to protect yourself and staff if you have it? And how are you planning on letting guests know about what you are doing for your cleaning policies? So, I'd like to bring those three things into discussion. And Matt, I see you, but it looks like you're on the phone, so I don't think you're talking to us. Okay, and the other session, I see a question in there. It looks like it has not started yet. And I know that we have multiple Zoom accounts, and I suspect what happens is the allied partner that was on the other section hasn't quite ended up their session yet. So maybe I'll be lucky and get more for this. So I'm going to start with some of the things that people have passed on to me. And again, please jump in, because we want to try to make this a positive, constructive experience so that people can listen to what other people are doing and maybe get some ideas to take away from this. But I know from the perspective of what innkeepers that I've talked to, what they are doing to protect themselves, some of the bigger properties that I've talked to up in Maine, for example, and unfortunately they're not closed yet, they're not open yet, but this is giving them an opportunity to prepare even more for this, is they're actually not doing checklists, but they're doing more verbal checks with their partners or spouses, but also with staff members, to make sure that, hey, if you're going out in front of guests, they're actually putting Post-its outside their office doors and outside the kitchen saying, please make sure you're wearing a mask when you're in contact with guests, just as an example of that. They're also making sure that they're putting signs and reminders everywhere to put things like gloves on, for example, so that when they're out in public, they're also physically giving guests the visual appearance, and it's not just the appearance, they really are being very, very cognizant of sanitation, but to tell people visually to know that in their photos, but also in person, that they are being as careful as possible. So has anybody really thought much about this and taken this into consideration? And if you have, please jump in, because again, we'd really love to hear your ideas or thoughts, or maybe ask some questions about where you're getting stuck on things. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Heather, this is Kristen out in Oregon. One thing that we're doing, I do have a housekeeper and she will be wearing a mask. We're having them screen printed with our logos on them.
Okay.
I wanted to do smiley faces, but I don't think that's going to happen. But my housekeeper has always just worn whatever she wanted to wear.
Mm-hmm.
Now I will be buying her a uniform that will stay, or multiple uniforms,
Mm-hmm.
that will stay and be laundered by us. So she will come change into it, so that anything that gets on her stays in the laundry room and comes off in the wash.
Great. That's a great idea. And I know that a lot of people that have staff have also run into that, and they have mentioned that as well. Do I have anybody else? And for those, we've just had a bunch of new people joining us. We're talking about what you are going to do or doing now to protect yourself when you are coming into contact with guests, and also what you're doing to get your stuff ready to interact with guests. So, are you taking extra measures? Are you communicating that to your staff, and how are you communicating to them? So thank you, Kristen. So anybody else?
Well, I'll just add one more thing.
Okay.
I see Jerry made a comment about if we're freaking out guests. My thought on that is that in our area, the restaurants are going to open before the lodging is allowed to take guests, and the restaurants are being required to have all their front of the house and back of the house wear cloth face coverings. We're not allowed to call them masks anymore because masks are for
scary.
Well, they're for medical people. So we're wearing fabric face coverings. So by the time they open lodging, they will have seen the fabric face coverings on all of their restaurant staff. So I think we'll be good to not be scaring people.
Okay, and I think that's a great point, Kristen, is to, I think a lot of the wording that we're using for advertising, we're going to have to adapt. And I think, when I think of mask, I think that's a scary term because I think medical, but when you say something like cloth face coverings, that's a lot more down to level and understandable. So I think, not just that, but some of the other things that we have taken for granted, it's definitely something that we need to think about and address. That's a terrific point. Anybody else want to jump in on that one? Okay. And I mean, there is some questions. Obviously, it's regional as to what is required, and we have a choice to do. Our area has very little of the COVID problem. And I'm sorry, did someone unmute?
I did. It's Scott at the Chadwick and Think Reservations.
Hi, Scott. Yes. Yeah. Hi, Scott.
So I actually have a concern. I don't know that there's really an answer for it, but just being a person who looks at Facebook as a distraction right now, my own personal Facebook, what happens? It's great if we want to put these measures in place, but what happens when you have a guest who's defiant in this, who says, it's my freedom not to wear a mask? Do we really have the power to force guests? I personally, want people to have a face covering or mask or whatever you want to call it, but it's, I'm a little worried about that guest who doesn't have the same maybe view as I do and feels that it's their right that they don't have to.
That is a really excellent point. I think I was reading this morning, I think it was maybe Ohio, that was actually requiring people to wear masks when they went out, or face coverings when they went out into public spaces. And I think that's something that people will generally have to discover. I know that in one of the restaurants that I'm working with in Boston, they are actually going to be posting this. So there is going to be a sign on the door that says you are not going to be admitted unless you are wearing a face covering. And we have ones that people would can wear. And of course the question was, well, how are you supposed to eat in a restaurant wearing a face mask? which is a really good point. I mean, I think we have to take that into consideration too. I mean, if people are serving breakfast in a dining room, we can't exactly expect them to wear masks while they're also trying to eat our delicious pancakes. So that's definitely something that I think we're going to have to look into a bit more too. Oh, and that's interesting. And Donna, thank you. Ohio stopped that requirement because of citizen uproar. And that's, sadly, that's such a shame to see that, because the people that I'm seeing that are ignoring this are the ones that potentially are infecting the other people. And I find that very, very sad. I know on a personal note, I mean, I've got probably a good dozen friends that have lost elderly parents because of this. So this is a really very real threat out there that people do need to take seriously. I don't think you can really require anybody to do that. I think and I suspect, based on New York State, what I'm seeing in standards, and I think it's probably prompted by, what's happening because New York City is such a hot spot. They are actually trying to enable some laws protecting facilities to say, you can't sue because of this if you thought you got it here. but also for businesses to kind of enable their own rules. Freedom of speech is one thing, but if you choose to shop somewhere or use a facility, you're bound to follow the rules that that facility sets. I mean, it would be nice if more states enabled that, but we don't know. And Julie, thank you. You said you added a blog post with our guidelines to cleaning. That's fantastic. Okay. And I think in terms of messaging, a question for you guys out here. I mean, I know many of you have email newsletters or you're just starting out email newsletters, but how many of you are going to do multiple things? I think it would be good if our industry as a whole, and I've started to collect some, but what are innkeepers doing on a consistent basis? Are they emailing out what they're going to be doing? Are they putting an extra page on their website? Are they posting something publicly in their facilities and their properties to say, this is what we are doing for this? I have run into a lot of people saying, well, we don't want to scare people, but the number one thing that I'm seeing B&Bs tell me is people are calling for two things. One, they don't care and they're just asking if you have a room or you're open. And the other second most question, but I think is more of a priority to people, is what are you doing to make us safe? So I don't know if we're over scaring people by oversharing or not. That's a good question. Scott, did you have something to add to that? Okay. And Betsy, you had, I think, your hand up. And please feel free to unmute yourself. We do want to try to make this interactive, or you can post questions or comments in the chat bar. I mean, we have 88 people on, and it would be nice to have some interaction. This is one of the reasons that I like this type of format, because we can talk to each other on here.
I will tell you from my perspective, we have cabins in addition to rooms in the house. The rooms in the house are closed and nobody's, people are just canceling them even into June and July. So nobody's ready to do that, but they're still coming to our cabins and they can let themselves in with a code and check themselves in and check themselves out. And we've left a letter with them when they walk in that says, here's how we're sanitizing and disinfecting this place before you come, down to the details of the ice machine in the freezer, wiping it out, giving them new ice. And the hot tub, we have a checklist on that. They've been appreciative. And what's been a bonus for us is we are 5 minutes from a major highway. So the snowbirds from the South Carolina and Florida that are heading back north have found that we're 5 minutes off. And now the first person tried us out and they've now reported to their other friends that we are cleaning and it is safe. And so now all their friends, thank goodness, have made reservations over the next, 2 weeks, 3 weeks as they start coming back. So once people know that you're taking care and you're cleaning well, that word is going to spread to other folks. And I think that's going to be a blessing for the B&B industry, for folks who are going to hear about it from word of mouth. And word of mouth is usually the best advertisement.
Well, I think it's fantastic because all of the people that I've actually talked to, and I think it's actually really great for the bed and breakfast industry, is they're all telling me, I mean, my neighbors, just moved back, and when I talked to them on the phone this morning, because they came back from Florida and they're doing their 14-day quarantine from everybody around us, which is thankfully for them to do that. But they actually said, we've stayed at B&Bs before, but we generally stay at chain hotels. And from now on, we're actually staying at smaller properties because we think that they're going to be a lot cleaner, which I think is fantastic for the industry. And that's not the only person that I've talked to recently that has had that view. So I think that that's actually a bonus for us if you look at it that way. And there's a question from Donna. I'm curious how many properties are reducing their cancellation period. 24 hours notice makes us super anxious. We have 7 days, but I'm nervous that will scare people away. We don't necessarily have to stick to the questions that I had. I mean, that's a good question because a lot of people have been concerned about cancellation policies and reductions to that. Has anybody changed or is planning to change their cancellation policies?
Our cancellation policy has always only been 72 hours. And people are going to think I'm crazy, but we only charge a $25 deposit. So we're never under any pressure if we have to return a deposit because it's not that much. We have never been hurt by that. And since this situation is totally out of their hands, if they want to cancel, we cancel with no problem. And the good news is it comes back to us. They are very, very appreciative of it, and they rebook. But throughout our history, and we've been doing this for it'll be 18 years in a couple of weeks, we've never been hurt by our generous cancellation or deposit policy. And right now, I know there are people that are sitting on top of huge deposits, friends of mine, on huge deposits that they may have to return. And it hasn't been a worry for us because we don't rely on deposits.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that, Carolyn. And I actually have a favor to ask, is we've had several people, and this is a very good point. When you're putting messages in chat or you're unmuting yourself, could you please share from us where you're actually dialing in from, zooming in from? Because I think it would help us get more of a handle on things geographically. I mean, I'm in New Hampshire. Where are you?
We're in South Central Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate that. Okay, and it's interesting looking at the chat. I mean, I hope everybody can see that. If not, I will be recording the chat for this. So if anybody is interested to see what people are putting in, especially in regard to cancellation policies, it looks like a lot of people are reducing their cancellation times, which is very interesting. And I think that's definitely a question that a lot of people have right now. There was some questions, especially in some of the calls earlier, about requiring people to have their temperatures taken. You know, I know I talked to a gentleman at the CDC last week because I had probably at least several dozen emails and a couple of phone calls asking me, you know, A, is this legal? And B, is this even going to help? And the gentleman from the CSE, his name was Dana, and I can't pronounce his last name, unfortunately. It started with an F, and it was very, very Italian, but very, very nice guy and very, very informative. And he said, you know, honestly, requiring people to have their temperatures taken, whether it's digital or whether it's one of those laser guns that points their head and takes somebody's temperature, isn't really going to help, because the most contagious part are those weeks leading up to the actual symptoms when people are asymptomatic. So unfortunately, you know, taking somebody's temperature at that point really isn't going to help, because you're not going to know whether they have it or not. So I think I wanted to pass that along because I thought that would be useful for all the people that have asking that. I do want to touch on dining. We've got 3:48, so we've got about, let's see, we've got about 20 something minutes or so to go. And I know that's a huge question, and a lot of people have been asking what innkeepers you're doing. So I've gotten the range of information from people moving their tables 6 feet apart from each other. Some people are trying to do limited buffets, but what they're actually doing is they're putting an extra staff member to make sure that there's only one person at once going through the line. And I also had them add, after several days of doing this, because they're still open out in the Midwest, they're going to discontinue doing it, because what they had to do is every single serving utensil that someone touched, they had to actually exchange and then sanitize and replace. So I think, as had been mentioned earlier, buffets are probably a thing of the past for a while. I know a lot of people are doing things like giving in-room service, which kind of takes the B&B appeal away a bit. But on the other flip side of that, I think you could probably do a lot of fun things with that, especially if you were a property that was trying to appeal to the romantic set. You know, definitely for those families that have children, for example, there could be a lot more opportunities too as well. I mean, I think you do have to be cognizant of the fact that every room's going to have to reconfigured so you can actually have a safe place for people to eat, rather than people eating on their beds, which I'm sure can cause a lot of headaches by themselves. Okay. Anybody have any thoughts about breakfasts? Have they made changes already or planning on made changes? You know, I'm also interested in if they're actually changing some of their menu items to adapt to some of the shortages that we're seeing out there.
Heather,
yes,
in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we have a huge 14-foot common table.
Mm-hmm.
We've been open throughout the crisis and have been modifying as we go. Previously, we had a kind of a starter self-service buffet. We've eliminated that, of course. We are adding some lower cost cafe tables, just a table, like a 28-inch table and 2 folding chairs, all foldable, into our larger rooms. We have 3 areas because it's summer now where we've always served outside. So we're not getting rid of our big central table for logistic reasons, but we have always served breakfast over a 2-hour period, and we're starting to schedule different people to dine if they choose to dine in dining room. And if at the same time, one at one end, one pair facing each other in the middle and the other at the other end, which is what we're required in New Mexico, 6 feet distance for food service. Everything's getting served rather than, upon request, we're offering everything and serving. So no one does touch anything that another guest touched. But it's been significant for us, and this is where we are now. We'll see how it evolves.
Okay, great, thank you. And we've got quite a few people putting things in chat about what they're doing. And there is a question here too that I actually got asked by several of the restaurants that I'm working with, is what do you do with shared items? And just to give you a little insight into how some of the restaurants are sharing this, if you think about how a typical restaurant has salt shakers that are supposed to get wiped down in between when guests sit at tables, but also things like those little sugar packet containers. So many of them have actually moved to individual little like sugar pots, where they're actually just giving people a little bit of sugar and people are requesting more. That's one way around, because they were concerned about, if somebody's, getting a single packet out of something, they can also be touching multiple other packets. And until we know for sure how long this virus stays on surfaces, even though supposedly it doesn't stay for a long time on things like paper and cardboard, we don't know that for a fact. Okay. And there's a question on what to do with our Keurig in the common area. And if anybody else has what they've done with this, the feedback that I've gotten from innkeepers so far about Keurigs is, unfortunately, they've taken them away and put them back in the kitchen, and they've put a little sign up saying, if you would like a cup of coffee, we'd be happy to brew one for you, which unfortunately is extra work for the innkeeper, but does cut down on people touching it. Does anybody else have tea and coffee stations? And if they do, what are they thinking about doing to adapt these? Are they taking them away completely? Oh, and that's an interesting comment about single packets. The head of the Maryland Restaurant Association discouraged single-use packets as he expected they would all disappear from distributors. That's very interesting, bigger to wipe down bigger containers. See, this is all interesting information because there's so much different feedback and knowledge that different states are putting out. And I really wish all of them would actually get together and share a lot of this information. Anybody have some things to add? We have a little bit more time. We didn't really talk a whole bunch about protecting yourselves, but what happens, for example, have you guys actually thought about, if you've come into contact with someone that has potentially had COVID, do you have plans in place for what you're going to do at that point? Has anybody actually planned that out yet? I know many people don't even want to think about that because they're closed now.
Heather, I was going to ask you something prior to the conversation. I just couldn't type it fast enough. The Keurig, because we have a Keurig that we keep upstairs with our rooms, and the guests really like being able to get their own coffee early in the morning while I'm getting breakfast prepared. So we've thought about just taking it away, and then we'll serve them coffee. How they just need to let us know. But many of them are also always like, I didn't want to bother you, even though we try to tell them that's what we're here for. One thought we had was putting a bottle of hand sanitizer right there, so someone can, with a little cute sign that says, wash your hand or use the hand sanitizer before you get the Keurig stuff. And then as staff, we will be going up there and wiping it down, very frequently and stuff.
Right.
That sent a terrible message, because part of me, I want to be safe and healthy for us and for our guests and for our employees. But you can't wipe every single thing down, and then I hate to lose one of the things that people have always liked about being here, So,
yeah, that's
what's the feeling on just putting the sanitizer and then having everybody use self-responsibility, and you have the signs that say, remember, wash your hands, 20 seconds, that kind of thing.
Yeah, when I was talking to an innkeeper this morning, and she was talking about keeping her Keurig, and there's a comment about putting hand sanitizer by the coffee station. What she's actually going one step further is she has a hand sanitizer station she's set up at a couple of locations around her inn. But what she's also doing is one of those big containers where you can pull the antiseptic wipes out, sort of like when you go into the supermarket and you can wipe down carts.
Uh-huh.
So if somebody would like to self-sanitize things as well, they can do that. So they're not just sanitizing the hands, but they can wipe it over the surface. So that's an additional option.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably, I know that there's a lot of different types of tongs out there too. I mean, people would still be touching the tongs, but you could find a way. And I'm trying to think of where I saw it. It was a picker, if you can call it that, and it actually was like a little grabby thing, so you could actually pick up a Keurig cup with a picker and insert it into the coffee maker. I'm not sure what those are called or where to find them, but you could probably make something or figure something out where people are actually maybe reducing that touch point of surfaces.
Oh, that's a good idea. Make it a game. Kind of like a puzzle thing. They do the game operation.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one.
That they can do. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and there's a question from Tatiana about the industry, including many hotel chains, has been moving towards dispensers and removing small amenities because of pollution. Is the trend now reversing? That is a darn good question. And I suspect that the small individual amenities might be coming back for a while because of this. I mean, it's think about the trend in grocery stores. We've been being encouraged to bring, our own cloth and reusable bags, and now we're not allowed to bring them. So we're all back to using those plastic bags again. So it's interesting. It's definitely, this is a whole new and very interesting experience for all of us. Okay, anybody else want to jump in? Do you guys have particular questions? Ooh, there's a good one. Can COVID grow inside the soap dispenser? I do not know. That is a question I will email the contact that I have at the CDC, though. He might know that. I think you would probably, you'd probably say no, it wouldn't grow inside the soap dispenser. I mean, soap and water kills the virus, but theoretically, if you had COVID above the soap line, theoretically it could, especially if it's in a warm, damp environment. I don't know. That is a very, very good question. Okay. And then, is anyone changing their policy to protect their guests in case the innkeeper gets sick? And that kind of ties into the question that I had, if innkeepers were thinking about what they were going to do if they got sick. I think one of the things they need to think about is not just if they get sick, but you need to have a plan in place for the fact that if you get sick, presumably you've been asymptomatic for a certain amount of time period too. How are you going to do messaging to past guests, or are you going to do that? That's something you need to take into consideration. Something one of my SCORE mentees had recently, and we're trying to figure out whether this is legal or not, is having guests sign a waiver when they check in. And it doesn't specifically say that, if you catch COVID, you can't sue us. But it is a good point about the fact that, if somebody comes down with COVID after staying with you, how are they supposed to prove it? I mean, typically somebody will come for 2 or 3 days to a bed and breakfast or an inn or, any property that's out there, and they'll typically go out. So how did they know specifically that they caught it there? I mean, that's a bit of a sticky wicket. I'm still trying to get some clarification on that. Yeah, and this is a good point too about a COVID. What about if a guest is diagnosed after? I mean, do we even know if guests will tell us if they're diagnosed after? Are we also going to have to think about follow up with guests to find out what their health sources are? We don't know any of this right now. But these are some very good points that I think, as people think about this and think about reopening or limited opening, or even if they are open right now, these are some of the things I think that you need to write down and really give some thought to, how to handle this, because we're going into a whole new realm of things that we've never experienced before. We don't know the answers to this, but I think you need to be prepared for how you're going to handle it. It's kind of like being prepared for those those really, really bad reviews that nobody expects, but how do you, it's easier to try to handle those and address them if you have a plan in place first. Okay. And there's a lot of new messages coming in. So again, please feel free to unmute yourself. I don't want to steal the whole floor just talking off what I'm hearing from other innkeepers. We've got 90 people on here, so there's a wealth of knowledge and information from innkeepers out there, and I know you're all super, super bright people. We'd love to get feedback from you guys. And
Heather, I have a question in Santa Fe.
Yes.
We've removed, toss pillows and throws and things that are difficult to sanitize. Are people removing rugs? Or just assume they're not down rolling on the rug?
People are not removing rugs. I know a lot of people are removing small area throw rugs. In conversations with Dirk, he's saying that, rugs should really be sanitized with those sprayers. There's those big electrostatic sprayers that are several $100s. I know the price has gone up, but he said that the actual little garden sprayers that you can get in, the local Aubuchon for $20 work just as well. I mean, I would say based on what he said several times is, to, sanitize that rug surface, as frequently as you can, and then probably vacuum that up as well. I would think vacuuming it beforehand, because we don't know whether this is aerating or not, would probably be better to sanitize first and then vacuum, because I know for a fact that anytime we use our vacuum, and I've got a couple of big dogs who shed a lot, there's a lot of dander that comes up from that. Okay. And I do apologize if the conversation where I'm going in direction for things is scaring people. But I think it's better to think about this in advance and discuss it. That was part of the reason that we were going to do this. And please, guys, jump in if you have questions, if you have comments. I really value your vast experience out there, and I know people are coming up with great suggestions and ideas for all of this.
And Heather, I've been taking notes on the chats, because there are a lot of questions that deserve a little bit more research than what we can do for the moment. What about disclaimers? Does help the innkeeper out? Is there loss of business income insurance coverage? And I know we've addressed that in the news you can use. Back, but we certainly can issue a refresher on that.
Okay. And I do want to address insurance companies specifically, and I'll have to admit I am a little biased, but I also kind of have some inside information. There's been a lot of people that are angry at insurance companies because even if they have business insurance prior or business loss insurance prior, their insurance companies are telling them we can't cover this. And my husband works for Travelers, so disclosure for that. And I know that Travelers has been doing a lot, as are many other big insurance companies, at least about trying to reduce rates and give back premiums to try to help that out. Travelers, I think, donated something like $10 million to relief funds for medical, so they are trying to help. But I actually got forwarded a very, very interesting breakdown that was distributed by the insurance industry saying, we honestly would love to do this, but we're going to go out of business if we try to respond to all of the claims that have come in, because there's literally millions of claims coming in from businesses trying to claim this insurance. There's just not enough money out there to even try to cover a fraction of this. This rolls into the realm of how unexpected this type of thing was. Nobody could have planned for this type of thing, unfortunately, at all. Okay, and this is some good points about, again, talking about wording is definitely talking about best efforts to clean and sanitize, and a financial ramification to best efforts. Say you're using commercially responsible efforts, I think is a really good point. And I think AHNLA probably has some wording that they suggested, but I'm sure that we can elaborate on that too. Okay. And I'm sorry that your premium was increased 50%. That's sad to hear. Anybody else? So we still have a few minutes, and again, I would love to get people's input on things. We want to try to help you as best that we can, but you need to really tell us what you need and what your thoughts are so we can help you and help others with that.
Hey Heather, this is Scott again. I'm gonna jump in one more time. I had made a comment a little earlier that I think one of the other things that is really our responsibility as an industry and as individual property owners ourselves is that we need to make it known to our lawmakers to, you know, that there's all, like, our guests also need to understand that there's inherent risks in traveling right now as well. I don't think that the buck stops with us. I don't think that it's feasible to have a staff member standing in every room at every moment to sanitize something someone just touched each and every time. I think there is a responsibility that falls on travelers as well. And as hard as it is to accept this, that, you know, we're going to experience a bad year probably. Like, we're going to have less travelers this year because of that. And yeah, that really sucks for our businesses, but it also, not all of this responsibility falls on us. So I think, yes, I love the fact that you said that, you know, I'm sorry that some of this all sounds scary, but I think some of that scariness can go away if we really make sure that our, you know, lawmakers and our lobbyists for our industry understand that it doesn't all necessarily fall on our shoulders either. You know, yeah, so, you know, we have to do all that we can for our guests. There's no question about that.
Right.
But as far as the responsibility, you know, they're still making a choice to travel also. Nobody, I always say, we're never holding their hands over the flame to buy anything from us. They're still making the choice to make that decision. So there is some inherent risk. Unfortunately, we've never thought about that before. Inherent risk of staying at my property, but in the new world, that's what we have to, you know, when I go skiing, I sign, you know, I'm not even promoting a waiver or anything like that. But when I go skiing, I know there's an inherent risk that I might not go home that day. It's not that bad for my property, but there's inherent risks in traveling today, period.
Yes. That's
you bring up an interesting point, because one of the thoughts that crossed my mind is the mindset of people who are traveling right now, because obviously they're taking a risk. And are there other behaviors risky? Are these the people that maybe aren't wearing masks, that aren't washing their hands, you know? And I worry a little bit about the type of person that's out on the road right now. You know, what's prompting them in the midst of a epidemic to go stay somewhere, and how cautious a person are they?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I mean, I do know properties that I've talked to that are open, but they are asking people where they are traveling from, and they are requesting as nicely as possible. You know, if you come to stay here, we do expect you to follow sanitation standards. We're trying to protect you, and we're trying to protect us, and we're trying to protect other people. I mean, again, that's a really tough one right there.
I have turned down people from New York and some from New Jersey, because I had a fellow that just clearly wanted a good time in the hot tub with his girlfriend. And I said, "Oh, and where are you from?" And he said, "New York." And I said, unfortunately, because he shouldn't have been out of his house, you know?
Right. Yeah. That's interesting, and I suspect that we're going to have to buckle in for the long term with this. I mean, we will get through this as an industry. You know, I mean, B&Bs, that's such the lovely thing about B&Bs is they're all unique, you know, and, you know, every innkeeper I've ever met in the last 15 plus years is just they're fascinating people to talk to. And the fact that they are living at properties and loving their properties just gives me such great hope for the industry. You know, I think that, you know, the more we can help each other out, and that actually brings up a point that I have on my list to touch on, since we still have a couple of minutes left, not many, but a few, is, you know, how many of you are really starting to think about, you know, more local staycation advertising, because people aren't going to be flying and there's going to be a lot less of it. You know, how many are kind of rethinking their business models for people that were normally, you know, would get a lot of overseas traffic, or people in from other states, and thinking about what they're going to be doing for more local drive-in traffic than they had before. I mean, have you guys given much thought to that, all of you? I mean, I know some of you have that I've talked to, but be interested to hear from some people that are thinking about that a little bit, or not thinking about it.
Hey, Heather, this is Kristen in Oregon. Two things. One, to answer that specific question, we've split up our email list into geographic regions, so we can target the drive traffic from Washington and California. And we'll definitely, I mean, most of our business is fly market, and we've got to figure out some way to make up for that with locals. But I also wanted to say something about the previous conversation. Our area is wine country, and so there's several B&Bs, lots of B&Bs, and some other lodging people, and we're starting to work together to create a message that we all promise to do these 10 things to make your stay safe. And I think it's going to be a great thing, and I think I'm even going to try and push it to a broader audience beyond wine country, so that we can say, you know, our whole region can say it is safe to come stay here, and we can work together.
Yeah, and I know that we've had multiple requests from people to come out with some sort of certification program that is being discussed. Because we have the partnership with AHLA, we are trying to help with that as much as we can. Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, not at this time, although you and I have talked about taking the lists from different reliable organizations and really curating them and putting them together so that they're specific to smaller properties.
Right, and I actually already have about a 3-page document from between HNLA and several of the other big companies, as well as California rolled out an excellent one as well. So we are trying to definitely put that, you know, not just to small properties, but we know that B&Bs and inns and other types of properties that are members, you know, are across the range of sizes and types, but one that can be suitable for any type usage. I mean, the interesting thing about a lot of these bigger initiatives that are out there is, you know, they are able to talk to the CDC and doctors, and they have, you know, they have bigger pockets to be able to, you know, pay for those funds and those initiatives. So we get to do the best of that and cherry pick through all of that and condense it for you guys. So I think that's actually a good thing that they're doing all I shouldn't say all the heavy lifting, because we still got a lot of heavy lifting to compile all of that. But it's great that we can take advantage of that and make an even better resource for our industry to be able to say, hey, look what we're doing. It's even better than what the hotels are doing. And so it's just a thought. So it's definitely a good thing. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I do.
Yes.
We do triple sheeting right now, and I am washing the blanket in between the sheets, even in case they might have touched it, and the bedspread and everything. And it's a lot of laundry to be doing. And I saw on the gentleman who did the cleaning breakout, he said the duvet cover was a really good idea, because you could slide that blanket in between it, and then so now when you're cleaning, the duvet cover is much easier to wash. Anyone recommend where to get those duvet covers, and especially ones that don't have to be ironed, because there's just no time for that either?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of duvet covers, I personally love duvet covers. And you guys are probably going to scream at me for this, but I've bought probably about a dozen of them from Amazon, and they're machine washable and they don't wrinkle.
Okay.
So, and they're not expensive, you know, they're nice, lightweight. They're about $40 to $50 each. So, I mean, they're not a ton of money. So I'm not sure. I'm sure some of our vendors, or I'm sorry, allied partners do have those as well. And we can certainly make a list of those.
And are they the kind that they can fold and go they're big enough so they can fold under the mattress?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And
and-
Heather, this
Yes.
is Patricia Widmeyer.
You still have to clean every
Wayfair.
Okay, one person at once.
This is Patricia Widmeyer. We
Yes.
find them at Wayfair.
Okay.
We get all of our duvet coverage from Wayfair. Very affordable, very beautiful.
Okay. So
order on size. Like I've got king bed, so I'd order a king size one. I don't have to go up.
Okay, and several people mentioned that InStyle and Comfy both and Guest Supply have duvet covers. So we definitely have some suppliers within our industry that have those, which is excellent. I mean, I'd much rather give a local person, business rather than Amazon.
So Heather, if you're putting that warm piece in the duvet cover, are you also washing that piece that goes in the duvet cover? You're washing everything, or no? What does most everyone do?
Yeah, I mean, I personally, if I was, and I'm looking at this from the guest perspective, I would ask if that's being washed too, because I personally would prefer if it was washed. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I just was curious what most people are doing.
Okay. Okay, and I do want to remind people, we do have a break from 4:15 to 4:30, but we do have development day wrap up, which we're asking for feedback. We want to make this better. This was definitely a trial run. I think, we did do pretty well. There was some hiccups, which is always to be expected when you're doing things for the first time. But most of the time people, I think, have gotten a lot out of it, which is good, but we always want to continue and make this better. Chris, do you have any last words of wisdom for us before we wrap this up in a minute?
No, I don't, but I think the ideas and practices that the innkeepers are putting into place are so valuable for other innkeepers to hear. And I'm really looking forward to, putting all those together in addition to, the cleaning, the safety type of issues, which we can get from other sources. But really, innkeeper to innkeeper is going to be some of the most inspiring adjustments to how you provide hospitality. And those are some of the things that I'd really like to pass along.
Okay. And I did just capture all the chat out of here. So we did have a lot of people talking about different things. Additional notes, we will make these available with the recordings. We should be able to get those up with that information too and compile everything. If you have any last minute comments, I've got about 10 seconds before we need to move on to the next thing. Again, I do very, very much appreciate you all sticking with this. We do want to try to help everybody, and we very much appreciate all of your insight and wisdom through all of this. So thank you, everybody.